One of the best guys in the NFL, former GM of the Cardinals, Steve Keim. He's working on some draft stuff. 3 playoff appearances, an NFC championship. Kyler Murray, Budda Baker, Tyler Matthew, Patrick Peterson, Calais Campbell. And outside of Kyler, Budda, Honey Badger, Patrick Peterson, Calais Campbell. You had success 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th rounds. This is considered a weaker draft. Are there guys, Steve, at the top of the 2nd that you think kind of are really high-end players that will start immediately?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question, Colin. And I think you look at this draft and you see a guy like Michael Mayer, the tight end out of Notre Dame, where you see Brian Branch, who can play that inverted slot position as a corner or safety in the high post. There are several good players left. There'll be a lot of people jockeying for those positions, and it's going to be an exciting day. To me, this is one of my favorite days of the draft. You know, we got Budda Baker we traded up for. Christian Kirk was a 2nd-round pick of ours. So you can really nail players that can help and help right away.
By the way, the Steelers have the first pick. So they just got their left tackle. They have their quarterback. So Pittsburgh's got the first pick today. How many teams do you think are calling them?
I think there's got to be at least 10.
10?
10 teams. And I would also say that they're obviously jockeying for position because they have a first-round grade on that player. They want to get better now, and they're probably offering a next year one.
So Pittsburgh's in the catbird seat here. Will Levis didn't go. I threw out the Raiders. He doesn't have to play. When he does, they've got a lot of offensive elements, offensive coach. Josh McDaniel can be patient. If Garoppolo does get hurt, Will Levis could play immediately. Hendon Hooker plays in the Tennessee offense that's kind of a college offense. I think Will Levis to the Raiders feels kind of right. Is there any that fit for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would make sense, particularly when you think that Jimmy G has probably got to be a stopgap guy. Then you have an offensive head coach who has had success with quarterbacks in the past. Why can't he develop a guy like Will Levis who's got the basic skills that you want for the position? Yeah. And now, you know, at some point in time as well, we know, Colin, you got to take a swing on these young quarterbacks.
So tell me a team yesterday to you, a couple teams that you thought were winners that you really like what they did.
I thought John Schneider nailed it in Seattle. You know, you get the best receiver in the draft in terms of rankings. You get the best corner. For him and Pete Carroll, you got to be thinking that they're looking at 2 guys right here for the future, Richard Sherman and Tyler Lockett. 2 similar type athletes for those positions. Then you got to look at Howie Roseman, what he did in Philadelphia. I thought was phenomenal. He just keeps the rich get richer. You know, Howie Roseman gets one of the most talented defensive players in the draft. He gets another pass rusher who I thought was very similar to Hassan Reddick that we drafted out of Temple, who had a fantastic year last year in Philly.
Yeah, the Nolan Smith out
Correct.
of Arkansas.
Yeah, very similar. Quick, explosive edge rusher. Then I think, you know, you look at, again, a team like Buffalo. I love the Dalton Kincaid pick.
Yes.
Giving a young quarterback more firepower, a guy who can stretch the seam vertically and is explosive as a pass catcher.
My theory on Buffalo is I think McDermott's smart, but he had a great front 7. Tremendous backers, excellent safeties, and he still can't stop Cincinnati and Kansas City. Could I argue they have made a little bit of a pivot saying, listen, we're going in the AFC now, you got to win track meets. We can't stop anybody here. Is some of that move to Kincaid an acknowledgement of defense has limitations in 2023?
I think 100%. And I think Brandon Beane has got to look at that conference and think, how can I win this thing? And to me, you got to look at the big picture, which is the NFL has changed rules, which are more in favor of offensive players. When you start looking at the mismatches on the field, NFL wide receivers versus corners. There's not enough corners to cover all those good receivers.
You told me this years ago. You can't find a third great corner.
You cannot. And then on top of that, the difference in athleticism between defensive linemen and offensive linemen these days. There are some freak defensive linemen that are so talented, and then you got Joe Bag of Donuts playing offensive guard for you, which has put more importance on offensive linemen as well.
So I want to talk about your former team, Arizona. So J-Mac and I talked about this earlier. It's hard for me, if you take the teams out and you just said a team moved up for the best left tackle in the draft, I'd be like, well, it's a foundational piece. So I understand if this draft is not a great draft, but there's one left tackle or 2 you love, and I have a star quarterback, doesn't the move for Arizona make sense?
I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, again, left tackles do not grow on trees. We know that. Number 2, the kid in itself, you know, Paris Johnson is a tremendous talent, but also a character guy.
He's supposed to be a great character
He lights up the room when he comes in. So not only are you adding a left tackle for the future, you take your current tackle, DJ Humphries, you move him to the right side, so you're much better already, and you instill confidence in your young quarterback.
I heard actually that left tackle, Paris Johnson, speaks multiple languages. Great student, like will come in and learn your offense immediately. How much does that stuff matter? Like Jalen Carter, red flag stuff. I look at your guys, and you drafted Honey Badger, who had some baggage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Remember there was some marijuana stuff?
Sure.
So how do you view, because for Philadelphia to get Jalen Carter, he's the best college player I saw, how did you view that?
I think, again, fortunately for Howie Roseman, you have the ability to take chances, because of your roster, because you have a locker room that polices itself. So now you put him in there with Fletcher Cox and some of those stud defensive linemen.
Right, Kelsey and all of
the kid's going to grow up pretty quick. And if he doesn't, he's going to be out of the league pretty quick.
Right.
We drafted a guy named Robert Kimdichie in the late first round.
Yeah.
He was tremendous talent, but we didn't have the locker room to police itself.
Interesting.
Which really, again, for Howie, in my opinion, now that he's putting him not only with other teammates from Georgia, but he's putting him in a position to succeed right off the bat.
When the Colts and Anthony Richardson, so he's very, very raw. So this is just me as a talk show host. I didn't love the bicep show. I didn't love the selfie in the bathroom. I do think from the time the season ends to the draft, there's about 8 to 10 weeks. You can, not significantly maybe, but you can elevate your stock, interviews, degrade it, saying the wrong thing. The Will Levis, Anthony Richardson, they're both a little raw. Were you surprised that the Colts went with the more raw player?
I wasn't. I have a lot of respect for Chris Ballard. I think he does a great job in Indianapolis. And I think, again, when you look at the big picture, Anthony Richardson was the most talented player at that position in this draft from a physical standpoint. Again, you have a guy like Shane Steichen who did something that I didn't think he could do, which was make Jalen Hurst into a tremendous player.
He was almost MVP.
I told Howie Roseman 2 years ago, he asked me, he said, do you think Jalen can do it? I said, when it comes to make NFL throws from a pinpoint accuracy standpoint, I didn't quite think Jalen had it. He proved me wrong, and Shane Steichen was one of the reasons.
And now he's the Colts coach.
Correct.
So let's talk C.J. Stroud, and I'm probably wrong on this, but I was watching the draft coverage, and all these guys on all these networks, the NFL Network and ESPN, and there were some you give me more information, and there was a lot of compelling arguments for C.J. Stroud, and I think one of them on ESPN was, listen, he's Jared Goff, but he can move. And I thought, well, Jared Goff's pretty good. Jared Goff's a pretty good player. And I look at C.J. Stroud, and I'm like, if you give me Goff with mobility, well, that's a top 12, 13 quarterback in the league. What did you see on tape from C.J. Stroud?
I think he's a very good player. I think he's got the ability to be a strong starter in this league. And what I love more than anything about what Houston did was they made a decision. Okay, so what they did is they had to instill some confidence in their fan base. Not only did they cover up and take care of that quarterback position, they covered up and took care of that pass rushing position, and they were able to do it by making that trade while on the clock, which I think is very, very difficult to do for a lot of different teams. So Nick Caserio, I think, came out of this thing feeling very good. Not only that, but you have a ton of salary cap room moving forward. You have this money to spend. So now you supplement through free agency moving forward with a very solid base of young players.
Explain the Falcons taking a running back. Didn't bother me for my own reasons. A lot of people banged on it. Now, I had a GM tell me they thought that Bijan Robinson was the single cleanest player in the draft. Bryce Young was a tad small. Everybody was, Will Anderson's good, not special. That Bijan is a day one starter, checks every single box, catch, run. But people say, well, they found a guy late in the draft last year. They already ran the ball well. What do you make of their move and why they made it?
I love it because the guy is a difference maker. We've talked about philosophically not taking backs high. If he's a difference maker, you take him. Okay, and that's my opinion. Not only because of that, because of what he does schematically. He can get in the slot. He runs great routes. He catches the football extremely well. And when you have a situation where if Atlanta's not going to commit to one of these young quarterbacks, what do? You got to help him with the run game. And Arthur Smith is a brilliant guy. He's very articulate and thoughtful with his understanding of his offense. This guy fits what they do. He helps a young quarterback with the run game, figure out if he can play in Atlanta, Ritter, if he can play. And then if he can't, you got to move on to a young quarterback at some point in time here moving forward.
Was there Will Anderson, the edge rusher? Again, people can bang on the Texans, but I think they could argue in kind of a middling draft, we got two of the top 8, 10 players. Is Will Anderson a dominant player? What kind? You had J.J. Watt. You know great players. You're in a division with the Bosas.
Right.
You either competed against or had Chandler Jones.
Correct.
You know edge rushers. What is Will Anderson?
To me, he's a 10, 12 sack year guy.
Okay.
To me, he reminds me a lot of Robert Quinn when he came out of North Carolina.
Yeah.
Very, very good player. And more than anything, I think, when you're the Houston Texans and you're in a situation, DeMeco Ryans, you want a character guy. You want a guy that is committed to the game, that's passionate. So that is infectious in your locker room. Years and years ago, I scouted a guy from Alabama who was a really good linebacker and one of the best character guys that changed locker rooms, named DeMeco Ryans.
You drafted DeMeco?
No, I said we scouted him, and he was a guy that had tremendous talent, tremendous character, won the second round, so he was overlooked a little bit, had a tremendous NFL career.
Isn't that amazing?
And again, now he goes back to the well, gets another character guy from Alabama who has been there, done it, and now you're setting your team up for the future with two guys who's played at the highest level at Ohio State and Alabama.
So let's talk Lamar. I said earlier, in Phoenix, you got to have a pool. In Alaska, you got to have a winter jacket. In the AFC, you got to have special at quarterback. You can win a lot of ways in the NFC. You can kind of win one way in the AFC. You got to put up points. The Ravens didn't really have a choice, did they? They had
no choice. What are you going to do? It's what we talked about many times, Colin, the supply and the demand at the position. Do you either think you have a chance to win it all with the guy or do you not? You're playing musical chairs. Lamar Jackson gives them a chance. And then what Eric DeCosta did with Zay Flowers in the draft, I thought was a tremendous move. So not only did the Baltimore Ravens, in my opinion, win in the draft, but it was just the day itself. They got Lamar done. They got the receiver they wanted. I think the Baltimore Ravens, who continue to make good moves in personnel, they've always been a great, starting with Ozzie to Eric DeCosta, they do a great job in the personnel department.
The Packers never take offense in the first round. To their credit, they always have a good offense. They went and got an edge rusher from Iowa. Iowa just makes good NFL players. It's almost like if you draft an Iowa guy, they're often better pros than college guys. Right? Like their offense doesn't score a lot of points. Is it just a fundamental belief in Green Bay? I feel like they always go defense early. Is it coincidence? What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think number one, it starts with the player. And you talk about the guys, Kirk Ferentz does as good a job as anybody.
You know him.
They're two and three-star recruits. He gets them in there. They become great program guys. They're committed. They're usually Middle Western kids that sort of grow into their bodies later in the process. And here's a guy that can play that 3-4 defensive end, which is really hard to find. With his size, his strength at the point of attack.
Big.
Very, very big, and he's powerful, got strong hands. And I think he's a guy that fits what the Green Bay Packers want to do. And in that division, you got to stop the run game, particularly in tougher elements with the wind and the rain.
So yesterday you had 10 minutes on the clock. How much time on the clock today, round two? Is it 5 minutes?
Correct.
It's hard to make trades.
It is. And I was telling you earlier, people don't see behind the scenes. Every pick that you make, you've got probably 4 or 5 calls every pick. And you have to make that quick decision of whether you take the pick, whether the calculation of the points adds up to maybe move back or move up. And it's just a lot of moving parts that people don't see.
So you have that draft, the Jimmy Johnson draft chart.
Yes.
You've got it right in front of you.
There's generally about 3 different charts that teams use throughout the NFL, and that is one of them. And again, some of them are a little different in terms of point situation, but again, it's something to base off of. And more than anything, go get a player you want. If you love one like Budda Baker, I didn't care what I had to give to get up.
Yeah.
Because I wanted Budda Baker, and I knew he could be a difference maker in our organization.
Well,
and I think that's what a lot of people are thinking today. There's a couple guys up there, whether it's Michael Mayer, it's Brian Branch. Can that player put us over the top?
Mike Tomlin, well, he's got Minkah Fitzpatrick back there, so he doesn't need a safety. He likes those safeties, though.
He does like them.
He's had some good safeties.
Yes, indeed.
Steve, it's great seeing you.
Thanks, Colin. Enjoyed it.